very excited and we really miss it. So Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome back. What is some words about Data Plus Women? Data Plus Women is a networking group for women working with or around data. And our purpose is really to promote the women and celebrate the achievements. So if you have, like, you want to see something next, a new topic, a new lady that you already like and you would like to see feature, please contact us and we will try to have her on stage. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, so we start in October 2019, and we had three physical events, I think, in total now, and the rest has been virtual because it's true that it's like more fun. We can reach a more large audience, obviously, and have like a speaker from all over the world. So if from time to time we'll have a physical event, we really like want and target online event. So that is me. I'm working, I'm leading the Tableau Center of Enablement for a Swiss bank. I have the chance to have been named a visionary this year and ambassador in the last 3 years. Tableau is really my passion. I really like to do that. And I'm with pleasure co-leading the Data Plus Women Zurich group and Analytic user group. And I have the chance to be with Olivia, who is a data scientist at Meta. And she loves surfing, sky touring, books, and she's back finally. During 2 months, she disappeared in Costa Rica, and we were like very close to have to make an intervention and rescue her. So I'm very happy to co-lead this event with her. Otherwise, I will not be able to do that on my own. And I will let Olivia present the wonderful program that we have for you today and our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Annabelle, for your nice introduction. And hi to everyone. Good morning, good evening, whatever. Here you can see it's dark. So for us, it's good evening. I'm super excited to have our speaker, Julie, today with us. I already got a sneak peek on what she will present to us. One thing I can tell, it will be amazing and super interesting. I already had so many questions. But before we start, a quick introduction. Who is Julie? I mean, she will, for herself, will actually tell, I guess, more words about herself, but she's an art director and data information designer at DataVIZ. If you haven't checked her Instagram page out yet, I highly recommend to do so. Super interesting, super inspiring. Please check it out. I think before that she was a literature teacher, and she has been working at a creative agency. And now I think she just works independently and is creating visual and beautiful art, I would even call it. Also, if you haven't checked it out, she is the creative director of Nightingale, which is a journal of data visualization. And I think she will tell us more words about it later on. Yes. With that, I actually don't want to take up so much time anymore. Julie, the stage is yours. For the audience, if you have any questions, please write them down either in the chat or in the Q&A. We will monitor them, and at the end we will have like a small Q&A session. So yeah, please enjoy.
Okay, thanks a lot, Olivia. Thanks a lot, Annabelle, for having me. Can you hear me? Okay, that's brilliant. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm just going to shut down my camera because I don't know why my connection seems to be acting up a little bit. So I hope the presentation won't lag, and I'm just going to stop the video for that. Okay. And I'm going to share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Just shout if everything goes wrong. Well, thanks a lot for having me talking today about anarchy in data visualization, which is a little bit clickbaity, but the fact is that it's quite a common saying to say that history is made by rebels and pioneers, and that no one was ever remembered for sticking to the rule. And though we're probably not aiming for making history here, it's probably true too that no visualization is to be remembered for sticking to the rule. If we're looking at one of the most worldly famous current visualization, the only one to have its own international holiday, the warming stripe of Ed Hawkins, it certainly breaks a couple of basic rule of a good visualization. We have no title, the one in the bottom, the one I added, no caption, no color key. We only have a diverging palette in a stack horizontal bar. And yet, or thanks to the infraction to the common DataVIZ guideline, you can see this visualization all around the world, and you can even wear it on your feet. Another example of a well-remembered data visualization, and probably I think the first one to have been bought by a museum to enter its permanent collection, is the famous Poppy Fields by Valentina De Filippo. And here again, we can't help but notice a couple of broken guidelines. We have an unusual 2 timelines XY axis with one using an algorithmic scale we thought to usually avoid for understandability reason. We have those lines that intertwine. We have an area-based attributes on more complex shapes than simply geometric ones. We have also a similar color palette for distinctive categories and so on. Yet again, I think all these derogation to the rule are absolutely purposeful and undoubtedly help building this iconic visual metaphor of the field full of poppies, the remembrance flower, and convey the tragic story of bloodshed it tells us. And incidentally, this visualization is also the reason why I'm here tonight with you, because it's this particular visualization among the project Writing Without Words of Stephanie Pozavec that made me realize I wanted to become a data designer and made me pursue my career in data visualization. Which brings me a perfectly smooth transition to introduce myself to you and explain why I'm here today being an agent of chaos in data visualization, like the Joker in Gotham City. So as it has been said, as Olivia said it at the beginning, I used to be a teacher. I have a literary and philosophical background before I changed of career path. I did some training in graphic design, and then I was for like 5 years an art director in a creative agency. And this is where I discovered data visualization. And I wanted to make more visualization. That's why I create the Instagram account Data Citron, and that's kind of how everything started for me. I also founded with other data designer collective, international collective called the Data Suffragettes. And just after the first lockdown, I actually quit to become an independent designer. And I'm also the creative director of Nightingale, and still actually a teacher. So I was back to teaching, but no in data design. And being a teacher for like a good part of my job, don't get me wrong, I love rules. I love learning them. I love teaching them. I understand their values. I think they're extremely powerful teaching tool. They are truly appealing and reassuring, especially for beginners, because they help them navigate in this new field. And I think even more experienced practitioners still love to refer back to them to check if they're still in line. I also think that they allow us to communicate with each other, to create a common ground and bridge to the audience we can all use to exchange. So rules are really a good thing and a necessary thing. But I think we lost sight of what they are and what they are for when we start to absolutize them, to essentialize them, and even sometimes deify them. DataVIZ guidelines are not to be confused with the table of the law. No data god or goddess has written them in a Twitter marble feed. So it's important to keep in mind that rules are not absolute axiom we need to obey, but simply repeated observation we kind of all agreed upon of what practitioners do and seems to be efficient in what they're supposed to do. So if we take, for instance, kind of the most basic chart, the infamous pie chart, it comes with its own set of rules. So you always start at noon. You have no more than 5 or 7 shares. 5 is better if you can. Your share are not supposed to be less than 5%. And the most important of all, don't use the pie chart. It's quite bad. If you really have to use it, use a donut instead. But this rule have not been invented at the same time. Probably malevolent individual created the pie chart. But I'm just kidding. I will stop this pie chart bashing because I love it. I mean, I don't love it, but like everybody, I use it sometimes, you know, like sue me. But these rules are the results of observation, and we can track them back to why we use them. So the noon rule is because it has the same entry point as a clock. So it's quite practical to read. The 5-7 shares rule is for readability reason, same as the not less than 5% rule. And the don't use it rule, it's because pie chart relies on an angle pre-attentive attribute that we know perform badly. And that's why you should probably use a donut instead, because it's already better because our eyes and our brain will read it more as a circular stacked bar, like you have bent stacked bar, and he will then try to estimate the bended length of the chart instead of trying to gouging the angles, which he can more accurately do. So they're not really rules per se. I would more call them evidence-based regulation we learn to introduce in our practice, but rule is much shorter. But because we sometimes taught these principles without the evidence that support them, we end up seeing these rules are absolute. And I think we are reinforced in this belief by, I would call, champions of the rule, those DataVIZ legalists who love to dictate principle. And I'm going to talk about one, I believe, the most famous of all, and one of this most famous rule, which is the ink ratio by Edouard Tufte, or Tufte. I would say Tufte because it's a French way. And by the way, I hope there are no Tufte stan in the audience tonight. And if you love the ink ratio and you use it daily, I mean, you do you, boo-boo. I'm not here to say you shouldn't. And for those who are less familiar with this principle, Tufte in his bestseller, The Visual Display of Quantitative Information, that was published in 1983, a year that apparently faced an unprecedented shortage of ink, state that in order to achieve the best or really efficient data visualization, you should have the best ink ratio, meaning the amount of data ink divided by the total ink used by the chart. And this ideal ratio can be achieved by removing elements that don't add new or necessary information, that waste ink in a way. Which is totally valid. We know that information overload can happen to the reader when he's confronted to redundant information. And that's why, for instance, when you design a bar chart, you either use an axis or you put the label on each bar, but you're not supposed to do both because then it's less readable, actually. But where I dissociate from Tufte is when it goes from a very shrewd observation to a more rigid kind of Kantian imperative, which leads him to recreate his version of Marie-Eleanor Spear box plot, or range plot, as she called it, to his own improved version, which is beautiful. I mean, it really looks like a minimalistic Kandinsky, but in terms of display, information display, I'm not really convinced. And I think the first version that uses more ink is actually much more readable. And I think it's a good example of the downfall of excess ruleification in design, because theoretically it should work, but it doesn't, because designing something is not a theoretical exercise, it's an empirical one. And I really believe that data design should always be about problem solving, about adapting to each data set and bring a unique answer instead of relying on the pre-made answers that are guidelines. And one of my favorite data visualization is one that I think follows this idea of adapting to the reality of your data set and your audience instead of following the rule. And it's a visualization about the evolution of office space. And if you were to do that by the book, you would probably do a line or maybe a bar chart. But the solution provided by the data designers, William Chase, it's so much smarter, and it looks like that. And I think it's brilliant because it uses area to show area, and the little collage elements let us see the scale. So it's really like we could witness actually the room shrinking around the worker. But it actually goes around the rules, because area are not a great attribute to show differences because it reduces them compared to a length attribute. And the collage element goes obviously against the ink ratio. Sorry, my computer is lagging a bit. But if we compare the visualization with the other one, sorry, which we will do in a minute. Yes. We can clearly see that the one breaking the rule and the one sticking to it, which one is more efficient in displaying information and bringing more appealing is being more appealing in conveying a story and strike our attention. And another example of a remembered chart, I think, is the famous inverted bar chart showing the human toll in Iraq war. And we're taught that bars that goes under the axis, especially when they're red, are to show negative values. But here, the unusual reverse bar chart works perfectly. And the design effort to physically represent the smear of blood on the page is more powerful than any rule. And I would even go further and say that it's precisely the obvious breaking of the rule, the literally overthrow of the convention that build this such impactful visualization, this friction that captures our attention and make it stand out in a otherwise quite homogeneous landscape of convention-driven design. And in a world saturated with images and visualization, breaking the rule is one way to ensure to be seen, to reach and engage, and sometimes even to create something so new and so radical that it actually redistributes the set of rules as we know them. And the case with the metro map created by Harry Beck, to take an example from cartography, when asked to redesign the London Underground map that at the time looked like this, Harry Beck broke the rule of cartography, the one that seems impossible to break because it defined mapping itself, that is to get rid of topography, to not show the places in their absolute position, but in their relative ones to each other. Because metro is not so much about an addition of particular place that a connected ensemble, it's a network. And at the time, doing a map like this, it's totally groundbreaking. It's the genius move. And we don't see it anymore because we're so used to see this kind of information displayed this way, because nowadays every city in the world who has public transportation had this kind of map. So the major broken rule became the new norm. And that really shows the true nature of rule, a once creative innovation that sticks and spreads before becoming a shared and favored convention over time. And we really need, I think, to remember that often the rules of today are the exceptions of yesterday, and that most rules we obey now used to break them back then. And one other, I think, important issue I would see with rule is when we tend to multiply them. And one of the fields with the most rule, I think, is typography. I mean, typography has its own legal system. And if you take just, the justification of a paragraph, you have to have a line, for instance, of no more than 30 to 40 characters. Otherwise, it's too strenuous for the eyes to go back. And then for the justification, you have a very large amount of words, of forbidden words you can't put at the end of the line, like preposition, for instance. You can't separate a noun from its determiner, a first name from its name, a day from its months in a date, and so on and so on. And this rule absolutely makes sense because they improve the reader experience. They help readability. But I don't know if you know that, but there's also a rule that states that actually when you do a justification, you have to alternate between a long line and a short one. And those lines, the short ones and the long ones, have to be approximately the same time, the same length, sorry. And you still have to obey to all the other rules, of the forbidden ones. And the way to achieve it is to actually painstakingly, manually play with the kerning to change the length of the line. And I actually did my internship in a museum when they asked me to do that with their programmation. So it was like dozens of pages to do that. And it took me hours and hours during days. And it was like the worst task to do. And I mean, what for? I'm not sure it really improved the experience of the reader. I think it's more about us designers showing that we know this rule and we're doing it. And I think we have to ask ourselves, when do rules stop being meaningful for the audience and start to be about ourselves and act as gatekeeping by separating the ones who know from the one who don't. And I think that's why most of the time we're afraid of breaking the rules, because we're terrified that it would be interpreted as not knowing, as a lack of knowledge, as a faux pas instead of a deliberate power move. And I think it doesn't help that we usually shown, when we learn data visualization, a creation of hundreds of fails and design faux pas that we shamefully, dash to learn. And yes, sometimes breaking the rule just doesn't work. I'm going to show an example, even if I'm really not for this kind of bashing, but here we have a designer that break quite an important rule because the rule of density colors to show the intensity of phenomenon. So here we have a darker color to show a less intense phenomenon and a lighter color to show a more intense phenomenon. Which I don't think works because it just goes against everything your brain is used to do. So yeah, I would say that's an error and that's probably not a good way to break the rule. But for me, it's really different to another fail that you usually find with this one, because it's also a map fail, and maybe some people will recognize it, which actually is my favorite fail. Because it's just, it's a really smart idea, actually. The designer really tried to push furthermore the encoding color system by nesting inside one color 3 variables. So I don't know if you can see here, you have actually 3 maps with ink layers that has been stacked together. And the 3 ink layer will create a new color. You have a little bit of how to read it. So it's like a really good idea, but it just doesn't work because our brain, our eyes is not wired to be able to estimate how many layers of ink there is in one color. But still, I mean, it's still a really clever concept. And actually, I think if this map was targeted to printer that maybe are capable of gouging ink in a color, it would have been a hit. But what I really love is that the person did achieve something, and he pushed boundaries and he experimented. And that's what breaking the rule is all about, you know, innovating and having fun. And I think we are lucky enough to be in a field that still have so much to experiment with, so many rules we can break and create new ones, without actually fearing too many consequences, except maybe finding yourself in a creation or fail on the internet, but which is not the worst. I mean, if you're a skyscraper architect or a surgeon, I would say, yeah, probably stick to the rule. But as a data designer, I think we can have the time of our life. And I thought that to finish this demonstration about rule, I could show you a little bit of behind the scene of one of my last projects, the thought and design process of creating something by breaking the rule. So the project is actually one that is featured in the last issue of Nightingale. And it looks like this. And it's actually a series of visualization. I call them the optical viz, about the answer of a DVS survey to its member about inspiration. And I had total freedom with this visualization. And I find that usually it's when you have entire freedom that you should actually give yourself the most rules and constraints to create with. And for me, actually, the thought process was inspiration. For me, it's all about spark, about this balance, this fight between this kind of light that emerges from the void and the darkness, and you have to follow to go somewhere. And in terms of visual, it made me think about this old scientific plate from the end of the 19th century that I was hoarding on Pinterest because I knew it was like a visual vocabulary I wanted to explore and to work with. And so from there, I actually set up a number of constraints. I think the key mindset here is not to think in terms of rules, but in terms of selected constraints. And with them, you can actually build a space, a flexible space that you navigate and explore. And every time you close a door, you have to open a window, actually. And I think it's better to work with this idea of fluidity and flexibility instead of the rigidity and fixity of rules. And so for instance, the first big constraint rule that I had to obey was I was only to use black and white. So I couldn't rely on color as the encoding system. And because I closed that door, I opened the window so I could use any other attributes I wanted to encode information. The other rules that I gave myself was no conventional charts. Didn't have to look like any chart you kind of already see or you can do on Excel, for instance. But that means I could be as elaborated as I wanted for those charts. And I think there it's okay because the audience targeted were the readers of Nightingale who are, expert or amateur of visualization that would either find it accessible or would be thrilled by the challenge. I would have done that if I was doing like a public poster about COVID. And the kind of third constraint I put myself was to use the visual vocabulary of all scientific plates and only those plates. But I could use any element at the encoding systems. And with this set of selected constraints, I could start designing actually. So this is like the starting point. And before anyone do pie chart bashing, the author of the first visualization, who should remain nameless, told me that he did that on purpose because then I could be free to do anything else. And he knew that that was probably not what I was going to do. And so you can see I was going to get rid of the colors. I couldn't use the pie chart either. And I have to use the inspiration of the scientific plates. And I find this one, I think it's really beautiful. I think it's a spectrum of color. I'm actually not a scientific, so I have no idea what I'm talking about, but it's beautiful, right? And the colors, the line of lights was for me those spark, you know, and that could give the frequency. And one of the visualization I had to do was for how many times a day are you inspired? So for me, it translated into having here, how many times a year, sorry, have the frequency of the visualization, but I still had to set how many people were actually inspired once a day or a few times a month or once a month. And so here you have actually the width of the bar that's showing this ratio. And because the visualization was a little bit more complex to read, we end up adding a key actually on the magazine telling exactly which attributes have been used to encode which information. Another example, for instance, I really love this idea of the different planes. And I thought, oh, that's really good because I could use them actually to show different categories and then use actually an area ratio based here to show the percentage. But I still wanted to be kind of an homogeneous I mean, we can see that it's still an ensemble with this ray of light that make them still communicate with each other. And actually in this project, there's also another really big visualization that I didn't put in my presentation because I thought I wouldn't have the time to talk about, but I think I have. And this big visualization is on the spread is actually an infographic. And it was the same thing about the cyclicity of the rule. It's like 10 years ago, you wouldn't use the term data visualization, you would use infographic, right? And people like us data designer would be called infographists. And it's funny to know that with the big data and everything, we moved away from the infographic and the visualization of qualitative data into more visualization of quantitative data and not aggregative data showing all the points of the data set. So for me, it was funny to, you know, go back to what was the rule before that was infographic actually. And so I create this big infographic that I don't know, maybe we can show it later if we want to talk about it, or you can also go see it on Nightingale, you know, subscribe or something, or I will do also a more in-depth article about it. Anyway, I hope that if it was needed for you, I remembered you that data design is for me a joyful maze that need to be explored, and that once you've learned to walk, you need to wander freely in it at the beats of your own drums. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Julie. That was amazing. It's really brilliant, amazing, the graphics you showed us. It's closer to art than I would say any charts or graphics. So yeah, I really felt inspired. Before we open up for Q&A, please, audience, remember that you can paste your questions either in the chat or in the Q&A. I haven't seen any questions yet. But before that, maybe you want to say some words about the magazine Nightingale. Is it online accessible? How can people maybe access it? Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah, maybe now that I have my camera on, maybe I can show you the visualization in the magazine because it's a funny thing. It's like we say that nobody reads papers anymore, but every time your work is actually printed, you feel like, you know, you're on top of the world. So here it is printed, and you can see the two spreads, and then the final one with the big infographic that try to actually map the roots of an idea from when you have your first spark of inspiration to the ended product. And the rest of the magazine is all about inspiration. So you would have different kind of, you actually have the warming stripe in there. And it's funny because Ed Hawkins talked about breaking the rules there, saying that he didn't know he break them actually, that it was a happy accident. And you have also people reflecting on their experience, and you can subscribe to Nightingale. So it's twice a year, or you can buy them individually, but honestly, they sell out pretty fast. So I'm not sure there's actually any left. Or you can also subscribe online, and then you have the online version, but not the printed finished objects. And you also have always some kind of goodies, you know, supplements. So you have here, it's an imaginable desk. So it's about visualization, COVID visualization, really, really interesting. And a lot of actually rules broken there too, or new rule sets. And you also have a version of the magazine for the kids. So it's called the Kids Table. And here you can see, I mean, I hope you can see, it's a poster with activities to play with your kids.
And if you don't have kids, you can do it yourself.
Exactly. Or put it on your toilets, because let's get real, that's where mine's gonna end.
It looks beautiful. It looks like you can put the magazine on your coffee table, you know, like those coffee books.
Exactly.
So cool. Okay, but it's also online accessible.
Yes, absolutely. You will have you just download the PDF then, or just show it online, see it online.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I think our audience is just amazed by they're speechless because they don't have any questions.
Please take advantage that Julie is there to ask any question. Apart from, I really like the comments. Everyone said that you rock, that you were like such a great presentation. And please don't hang your poster in your toilet, otherwise you'll never get out. No, but I have a question, Julie. How it's your activity during the at Nightingale? How do you select the article, for instance? If you
that's the editorial job, and I actually don't really interfere with it. So for the first issue was really about selecting, because before that Nightingale was only online, so they kind of selected the best articles and put there. The second issue is really more new articles, so actually anyone can submit an article to Nightingale. You have a theme for the issue. Next issue is going to be about guidelines, for instance, and you just send a draft of your article, the subject, to the editorial team, and you will be paired with an editor that would actually help you read a piece, write the piece, sorry. And because the magazine, I mean, it's quite big, but it's actually quite small. If you then don't end up in the magazine, you could still be published on the website that is entirely free.
Cool. We also have now some questions. So the audience isn't so shy yet. So one question was, what would you suggest if you have a very conservative audience?
Yeah, I think that's an issue I was tempting to address as well, because sometimes we don't break the rules because we have this kind of conservative audience facing us. Usually, I would say that your audience doesn't have the same amount of data literacy that you have. So, I mean, you may be breaking rules that they don't know, or you may be following rules that they actually don't know about. And so I think you can take advantage of this kind of gray area by doing what you want. But the other thing I would say that to convince people is that every time you break a rule, it's to make a point, to make a stance. And you really have to be able to explain why you're doing that. Like, maybe you can do the two version. I think, for instance, with the William Chase chart, I'm not sure anybody, I mean, when you see it for the first time, I don't think you see the broken rules, you just see a good design. But if you compare it to the version, you know, just basically sticking to the rule, then you can really see what breaking the rule adds to the conversation, bring to the table. So maybe something you can do is actually do a simple version, really conventional one. And then, you know, it's also reassuring for your audience because they know they have this option. And then you can show them the other version and say, see, if we change things a bit, we can achieve more by doing so. And another tips I would say is probably do it incrementally. So start by breaking not small rule, but maybe just one, you know. And as I said, it's really a working balance between the constraints you obey and the one you don't. So maybe, for instance, if you choose a really funky font, then, you know, have normal alignment, have a really strong text level of hierarchy, and don't burn all the cities at once, you know, just do it, just one thing, and then you can push it further and push it further.
That's funny that you say it. It reminds me of how I used to work with Annabelle, and she had exactly the same approach, breaking a few rules at the beginning and then.
Yeah, you can see, you know, if you end up in jail at the first, like, it's probably not the audience to do it with, but if they react positively, then you can, you know, push and push.
Yes. No, that makes sense. Thank you so much. I hope that answers the question. We have another one, which is also a really interesting one. It's about your career. What drove your career change? And how did you overcome the fear of the unknown?
That's a really interesting question. I was just talking about it yesterday with someone in the community that I just met, you know, for drinking a bubble tea. I think what really helped me to, you know, just have this leap of faith was actually COVID and the pandemic. So I wasn't really happy in my agency and I was looking for another position. And right in the middle of this process, you know, pandemic, COVID strikes, and I was at home. And I always had this idea that you have to have a plan, you know, especially for your career, like you have to know where you're going. But I thought, like, you can have the best plan and suddenly there's a pandemic and you don't control anything. So actually for me, it was really reassuring, like, yeah, we do live in chaos and we can't, you know, control anything. So we may just embrace it, you know, and that really helped me actually to just do it. And when I did it, it was, it was between two lockdowns and people thought it was like not a really good idea, but I never been as happy as now. And I never had any, honestly, problem in my career. So I would say if you really, really feel like you want to do it, maybe do it. But also I don't have kids and that kind of thing. So that probably helped on my family, and my boyfriend was really supportive. So, I mean, there's also the reality. I'm not saying that it's easy, just do it.
I love that though. Also super nice to hear that it's been so successful.
Yeah, I'm really lucky on that. Well, I think it's data visualization, you know, it's it has a niche economy, so there's like a huge demand and not so many practitioners. So most of the data designer I know of, it's the opposite problem. We have too much work, and we're always trying to bargain with other data designer, like, you don't want to take that mission, please. And you know, in graphic design, it's really different. It's much more competitive, but data design, I think it's probably the best time to join it. You know, it's exciting, a lot of things happening, people are super nice, so I think you should do it.
So to the audience, you've heard the verdict, be all data designers. So we have two more questions. Do you think rules can now be broken because people are getting used to read DataVIZ?
Yeah, I think the question of data literacy is absolutely the main one we should ask ourselves. And for me, Data Citron was also about that. It was about bringing, you know, data in Instagram, you know, in a much more snack content way to that people get used to it, you know, like it's your data sneaker every day. And sure, it helps, I think. But at the same time, I'm not sure, because again, I don't think people know visualization, but they don't know the rules behind it. And I think they're equally presented good charts and bad charts. I mean, on the TV, on political also use all kind of, you know, bar chart or twisted way of showing information. We have example every time. I think it's different from the errors that I showed just before, because it's intentional, you know, it's really manipulating the data. So I'm not sure, like, for instance, the Ed Hawkins warming stripe, it doesn't follow the rules. Nobody knows it. Nobody cares. It just works, you know. So I'm not sure, but data literacy is certainly a good thing. And I think it helps, maybe, if not the audience, us as creator to feel more legitimate in doing things more freely at a certain time.
Okay. Another question I also wanted to ask is tips for scientists to visualize data without becoming a professional data designer. How to start?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I think, well, you have to start slowly, you know, baby steps and everything. And, you know, when your work is always like 2 steps at a time. And I think it should be the same thing. Like 1 step should be about the tool, like learning software and stuff like that. And the other step should be about soft skill, like communication, training your eyes into design. And usually we focus on the first one because it's so much easier to learn, you know, and the other one, it takes time. It takes, getting out, seeing things. So I would say that's probably the best way to do it. And I also think that even if you're doing that for your professional career, maybe doing personal projects will actually help more, because you would be involved in another way on a more personal level. And there's a lot of challenge you can do in the community. I know Tableau has a super grateful community with lots of challenges you can join. That's a perfect way of learning. I think you will receive feedback, you will see what the other did, and you really have this kind of problem solving mindset that would help. That would be my advices.
And I mean, related to this question, what I also wanted to ask, where do you actually get inspiration from? You mentioned Pinterest.
So again, you have the tools and you have, you know, the soft skills. So as tool, yeah, I use a lot Pinterest. Like I'm really like, I have an addiction problem to Pinterest. And I also use Instagram a lot. And that's more the tool I use to try to get track of everything that inspired me. But, you know, like, I know it's really cliche, but inspiration is like kind of everywhere. And so the other source is really the books, the museum. I'm a really vintage girl, so I took a lot of inspiration from vintage design. And I think it's all about also having this mindset, a little bit like I show in the project, like you see this kind of scientific plates, and actually my mind goes like, ooh, how could I use this as actually an encoding system? You know, how can I trade these things as a visual information system? And everything could become a visualization, could become an encoding system. And when you do this kind of gymnastics in your head, I think it really helps, and everything then become inspiration.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I will try then. So we have another last question in the Q&A. Is there a place to kind of find these unsaid rules or just parameters for data visualization for beginners?
Yeah, I just told you that you shouldn't obey them, but okay, never mind. I'll still answer. So these rules, personally, I learned them mostly by doing professional training during my jobs. Otherwise, there is like hundreds and hundreds of books about them, like for instance, the Tüfte books I talked about. Alberto Cairo has also a really nice approach of rules. Twitter feed is a perfect place because Twitter is just like the table of the law. You just publish something and wait for someone to just, you know, troll you and say, no, you didn't respect that rule. That's a way of learning. It's a little bit painful, but that works. But books, probably, if you love reading books, that's the best way. It's just, again, the way they're formulating the thing, they tend to say, you shouldn't, it doesn't work. I think it should be more a softer formulation, like, we tend to observe that this works and this doesn't work, but there would be exception, of course. So again, if you learn this rule, try to also learn from the exceptions and learn to recognize actually every time the special rules has been broken, and it was a good thing that it has been broken.
I have a question myself for you, Julie. Why data citron? Is it for your piquant, your humour piquant?
The zesty side of me, as Tristan said it once. It's actually tragic because I don't really have a backside story to that name.
You have to create one.
Yeah, and exactly. One friend, data friend, told me you have to invent something really cool, but I have a problem with lying. So I always said, you know, the bottom truth that, I don't know, honestly, like most of my ideas, I have no idea where they come from. I was literally walking in the streets. I know I wanted to create an Instagram account about data visualization. I had no idea how to name it. I know I wanted to have the name data in it, data, and then just citron, you know, because yeah, I think it's a really iconic, pleasant fruit. It's French, but you understand it in every language. And the only funny thing I could say is that I don't really like lemons. I don't really eat them or anything, but I think they're pretty.
I love that. I actually love lemons. I eat them even.
They're tasty. I mean, they add something.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to do, you know, maybe add something, not a lot, but just, you know, a tiny drop, and it's already, it's still doing something. I think that was what I was hoping to achieve with Data Citron.
I think it's like when I saw your publication on social media, for me, it was very adequate, because I said, oh, she has like this kind of humor that's very, not acid, like in a bad way, but like very percutant, and really like it. So I said that maybe it's related to that. But for me, it's like more like a childhood memory. I had a very old lemon tree in my garden. So yeah. So
that's a beautiful story. See, that's the kind of story I wish I have.
You can take it from me.
Thanks.
We will ask you in 6 months. All right. So with that, I don't see any questions. And if you have any other question, we have all the information about Julie on our webpage. And the other thing, what we still wanted to say.
We lost Olivia.
It's not me, right?
No, we lost Olivia. So yeah, maybe she will be back. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming, Julie. That was like a wonderful presentation.
Thanks again.
A wonderful moment
me.
with you. It was like very likely. I hope that we'll see each other in Paris soon.
Yeah. If one of you is in Paris, I'm always glad to have an excuse to drink a bubble tea with data designer. So
perfect.
Don't hesitate.
I don't pretend to be a data designer, but I will gladly.
Well, data related person. You know, I have a big acceptance of the word.
But I have to say, stay humble. I don't have any pretension. But thank you very much. And if any of you would like to speak next time, please contact us. And if you have an idea of topic, please also contact us. We are always keen on finding a new idea. Thank you very much. I will stop the recording. Bye-bye. See you soon.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye.